Hello, I'm Senator Lisa Murkowski, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of Veterans Spotlight, which is a partnership effort in my office and the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. This project was created by the Library of Congress back in 2000 as a way to preserve the personal accounts of American war veterans so that future generations may hear directly from veterans and better understand what has happened on our front lines. As we all know, Alaska's relationship with our veteran community is unique. We have the highest percentage of veterans in our population in the entire United States. Our veterans have served with distinction. They have served selflessly, and every single one of them has a story to tell. Veterans Spotlight is our opportunity to listen and learn. We can learn a lot about our country, our state, and ourselves from the men and women who have fought for us and the freedoms that we hold dear. We owe it to our veterans to honor them through sharing their stories, and we owe it to our nation to use their stories as lessons of patriotism, commitment, and service. If you have a parent, a sibling, friend, or a member of your community whose service to our nation should be shared with the nation, I invite you to reach out to me at spotlight@murkowski.senate.gov.
It was, I was actually in Quantico, Virginia, which is just south of Washington, about 20 miles south. And we were in conference group talking. As a major, we were talking about whatever we were talking about in conference group that day. And all of a sudden, the director knocks on the door and goes, "Turn on your TVs." So we all start turning on the TV. And, the first, tower is already smoking. And then, the second plane comes in. And I remember one of my friends just turned to me and looked and said, "We're going to be gone for a long, long time." And, you talk about somebody who made a tremendous prediction. We were all gone for a long, long time. And that's when that kind of lost decade for all of us kind of started. But yeah, that's kind of where it all started. Scary is probably not the right word, but it certainly was tense at points. I think when we did the initial operations into Iraq, one of the things that concerned us the most was we all figured that we were going to take that we were going to be exposed to chemical and biological agents. And we'd kind of done the math and looked at it and found the areas that we thought as we moved north where Saddam Hussein would finally employ chemical and biological weapons. And so I think no one was that concerned about winning a stand-up fight. We all knew that we were well-trained and we had a good team, and in a stand-up fight we would be fine. But when you get into things like chemical and biological agents and things like that, and the fact that, ripping your suit, your chemical suit, or a mask filter that doesn't function properly, that can end your life right there. And I think once we kind of moved through that, I think, and we figured that we weren't going to get hit by a chemical or a biological agent. I think we all started to feel a lot better about it. I think one of the happiest days of my life was when we finally got to burn our chemical biological suits. And because we spent the better part of 30 days without being able to get out of these suits. And the weather was getting pretty warm. It was March into April. So you're wearing these charcoal-lined, basically, chemical suits and a mask. You always had your mask on you. So you didn't get to take that thing off for about 30 days. So at the end of that, you can't get out of it. You can't. There's no showers, obviously. But even taking a bath in a plastic container, your helmet or whatever else, you couldn't even do that because you couldn't get out of your suits. So those things were pretty ripe by the end of 30 days, and we were pretty darn happy to finally get out of those. But then the war kind of changed on us after a while. We went from a conflict that was fairly conventional in nature, conventional Army and Marine Corps forces, in a ground fight against conventional Iraqi Army forces. But that started to morph over time as you started to see the rise of paramilitary and insurgent groups, and finally Al-Qaeda during my second and third tours there. So what went from a stand-up conventional fight started to morph into something very, very different, what we called an asymmetric fight. where it was, their strength against some of our weaknesses, where, the IED, the improvised explosive device became kind of the weapon of choice, because they can lay that in the ground, disappear, kill or wound a bunch of Americans, and not take any casualties themselves. So as we morphed from a conventional type of an operation into a counterinsurgency campaign, one of the things that really impressed me about the Marines and the Marine Corps was our ability to adapt to that new situation, that new environment where we'd been trained to basically conduct a conventional campaign, but over time, things like economic development, developing government institutions for the Iraqis, different types of developing their military forces, their police, that types of thing. So we went from a conventional type of operation, early in the Iraqi campaign, into one where we were basically rebuilding a nation there, while under fire. And I think that was not only challenging, but I think testimonial, not only to the Marines, but to the other services as well, that we were able to adapt and really move away from our traditional missions and roles, and to do things that really weren't in the playbook before we went into Iraq and Afghanistan to a certain extent. One of the memories that I've carried for the better part of a decade now was when we were in the initial push north during Operation Iraqi Freedom, when we first went into Iraq, and we got to the outskirts of An-Naziriyah, a little town in the south of Iraq, where we had a pretty good dust up. And I can just remember a couple of truckloads of wounded Marines, being moved back from the front line back into the casualty collection point. And the remarkable thing that I remember about every one of those Marines is that nobody shouted out, nobody made a scene. The two questions that those Marines were asking as we were getting them off the trucks and putting them in the casualty collection point were, "Where am I?" and "How quick can I get back to my unit?" And the second thing I remember was during my second tour in Iraq in the fall of 2004, during the Battle of Fallujah, was we were at the battalion CP. Actually, a friend of mine's battalion CP. I was kind of checking on my troops that we'd gotten over into his area, and so I was seeing one of my friends, and all of a sudden there was a pretty sharp counterattack by the insurgents coming into our lines. And it got pretty dicey there for a few minutes. And all I can remember were the wounded Marines getting up and rushing to the sound of the guns. And all you could see in the dark were these white bandages kind of fading into the dark as they moved forward wounded to engage the enemy. So I think two things that have kind of stuck in my mind over the last decade are probably those two images of young Marines, who, young enlisted high school graduates, joined out of a sense of purpose and duty and patriotism, and what they were willing to give up and what they were able to endure and sacrifice for the Marine Corps and for their country. So those are probably two things I remember most over the last 10 years. Yeah, those are tough years. I mean, and your kids too. I mean, we've got 6 children between the two of us. I mean, we're a blended family, but we have 6 children between us. And from September 11th, 2001 until I retired in 2010, I pretty much lost a decade with my family. I mean, I lost, years. Because even when you weren't deployed, you were getting ready to go deploy, and so you were in workup exercises or whatever else, or you get back and you get a little time off, but then you're on to something else. So I mean, it was a lost decade. It really was, and it's a decade with your children. You'll never get back. I mean, you can kind of make up that ground with your spouse, and that we're both adults and we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. But there are certain things growing up with your kids that you can't rewind the tape and get back to that. And this isn't something. And there were Marines and sailors out there, and Army and Air Force personnel and special operations who have even spent more time than I did deployed, who are in exactly the same situation of basically a lost decade with their families. And you don't get that back. I mean, and you can't make it up. There's no way to do that. And I think as proud and as happy as I am of my military service, there's this gap in my life, in my personal life, that I can never get back. I have absolutely no regrets about my military service. I had the 25 best years, of my professional life were spent as a Marine officer, and like I said, and I loved the Marine Corps, and I loved what it stood for, and I still love what it stands for. And as Marines, there are no ex-Marines. I mean, there are former active duty Marines, but you can't ever stop being a Marine. You can't ever stop being a colonel. So I'll be that till the day I die. But but it wasn't that difficult to take the uniform off and move on to something else. The only thing that I still kind of get I miss the Marines. I miss my peers. I miss my friends. I miss the young Marines that served under me, and I still keep in contact with a lot of them. But I do. I miss the people. And any organization is really about the people, right? I mean, and the Marine Corps is no different. And I think that's probably my biggest, not regret, but the thing I miss the most about my military service is just the people that I served with. I miss them a lot. Okay. Well, after I retired, believe it or not, and as crazy as this sounds, a month after I retired, I was in Afghanistan. My background in intelligence support to counterinsurgency, I was recruited to be on a team that worked for General Petraeus in Afghanistan called the Counterinsurgency Advisory and Assistance Team, and I was basically the intel subject matter expert. So I basically traveled around Afghanistan looking at different intelligence operations in different parts of the country and reporting back to General Petraeus, and with strengths and weaknesses and recommendations and things like that for how I thought we could, for one, how we were doing, and two, how I thought we could improve that. So I did that for a while, did that for about 3 months, and while I was doing that, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency had some different technologies that they were using over there, and I was helping them out part-time with some of that, really large data set analytics and visualizations, meaning, how do you take, 2 billion lines of code and make it mean something to you in a visualization that a commander can understand and do something with. So, they had a team of basically Caltech and MIT PhD candidates who were, really sharp guys, and were doing some really great work. But what they didn't really understand was the tactical nuance of it. What does it mean? How would a commander or a staff want to see this information in order to make good decisions from it? So I helped them with some of that. And so after I was done with that, and I'd gone back to the States at the end of about 3 months over there, working for the advisory and assistance team, DARPA called me and said, would you like to come to work for us? And so I ran that project for them for a couple of months. And then they brought me on as a consultant. I was working them, but then they brought me on as a government employee and a member of the Senior Executive Service. And I ran all the DARPA technology programs in Afghanistan for 2 years, and then at the end of 2 years, this job had opened up here. The wife told me it was really time to come home for a while, and when I saw this job, it was a job that really appealed to me, and so I applied, and I was fortunate enough to get it. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I can do here is I understand the veteran students that walk in the door. I mean, I've spent the last 25 years with them, so I think I read them better than probably most people are going to, just because we have a common foundation and share some common experiences. So they can walk into my office and sit down and talk about Samarra, which is a city in Iraq where some of them served, which is basically right up the road from Fallujah, or different places in Afghanistan where I've been. We can sit down and talk about those things, and so I just think having somebody who basically understands how they tick to a certain extent is helpful. And if they're struggling a little bit, or they got some demons, I can get them referred, or after my last command in the Marine Corps, fully 1/3 of the command had declared cases of PTSD, and that didn't count the Marines and sailors who were just kind of trying to fight it themselves. So 1 in 3 had PTSD. So I've got some experience working with Marines and sailors who are struggling, and so I think I can help with that. But the biggest part of the job that I've got here is just making sure that they're getting their VA benefits, their educational benefits. The post 9/11 GI Bill that Senator Webb introduced is probably the greatest piece of veterans legislation this country has ever put together. I mean, when you look at the post 9/11 GI Bill, it basically pays tuition and fees for a 4-year college degree. It pays you a housing allowance equivalent to what a sergeant with children, a wife and children, gets on active duty. Which here in Alaska or in this area is about $2,000 a month, the cost of living allowance, or a living allowance. And the other great part of this, the post 9/11 GI Bill, is the fact that it's transferable. I mean, so if your wife wants to go to school, she can use your GI Bill. If your kids want to go to school, they can use your GI Bill. You can transfer that to your immediate family. So, I talked about that gap in my personal life, the last 10 years. That legislation, I do think, was a bit of a tip of the cap to our families and said, hey, look, you guys sacrificed too. You should be able to access and have eligibility for that benefit as well. So I think that's I'm really thankful for the post 9/11 GI Bill. I see what it does for the students here, and the fact that we've got students here who are married and who have children who still now have the financial resources to be able to go to school full time because of that legislation. I mean, I don't think, given some of the previous GI Bill chapters that are out there, that they would be able to do the same thing. So, being able to help them with their benefits, understand their benefits, get access to their benefits. This has been a really nice way to close out my professional career, in that I've been able to give something back to a group that gave so much to me over the last 25 years. I mean, no officer makes it on his own. I mean, we can mess things up on our own, but to get it right, you have to have, young Marines and sailors, in my case, out there who perform and perform well. And so everything I got out of the Marine Corps, I mean, every promotion wasn't anything I did. It was the ability of my Marines and sailors to get things done that made me look very, very good. And so being able to be here now and be able to help them get these kind of benefits kind of closes a circle on my career. And there's been, I was joking with one of my fishing buddies the other day. I was like, I haven't made this little money since, I was working in high school. But I'm probably happier doing this than anything I've done in a long, long time. So there's something to be said for that.